But let's start, though, with Robbie Faulk. He's one half, if you will, of the Thunder and Lightning podcast and SuperTalk. He also covers Mississippi State for 24/7 Sports. He's on your radio right now in studio with Hey Dad, but technology didn't allow us to have them both in the screen, so a picture is really all you're going to get today. But we get Hey
caught
Dad
his
up
good
there.
side there.
Yeah,
caught his good side.
It's a nice headshot.
You look very professional there.
I mean, you have Hey Dad on camera for 3 hours. Could I not sit in that chair for 10 minutes?
You know.
So it sounds like a very simple question. I guess it is, but I think it's a loaded answer. If I said, what did you think about Mississippi State football 2021? What would you say?
I think, they met most people's expectations from a win-loss perspective, I think. I predicted 7-5 coming in. Brian, I think, was right there with me on that. There were certain things that weren't met. There were certain things that I thought were above expectations for Mississippi State fans. I mean, they went on the road and beat Texas A&M. They went on the road and beat Auburn. And, that Auburn win doesn't look as impressive at this point in the season, but that was an Auburn team that was probably playing its best, at least, up into the third quarter of that game. Things started kind of tailing away for them late in the season, but, there were some big wins, and then you go looking at those games against Memphis and LSU and even Arkansas, and you wonder what could have been had Mississippi State pulled out those ball games. And that's kind of the overarching issue right now for Mississippi State is finding a way to get closer to what could have been instead of kind of what was. And what Brian and I always talk about, the Mike Leach experience. You don't want to go on this roller coaster ride with Mike Leach where you lose to Memphis and then you go to Texas A&M and win a ball game. You need to get closer to beating the teams you're supposed to beat and getting those upsets, and closer to a 9 to 10 win season than 7 wins and what they got. And I think the way that things ended for State kind of put a sour taste in a lot of people's mouths, but overall, you could definitely see the step forward for State, and I think that was the most important thing.
When Hey Dad did the preseason media poll, do you remember what you picked?
I picked 7-5.
Oh, wow. So you nailed it.
Yeah, he and I both had it right on that one.
Yeah, we both hit 7-5,
and he had Ole Miss winning the Egg Bowl too. So you really did well.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought Ole Miss would win that game, but I didn't pick them to beat Texas A&M.
No.
Or Auburn.
Trying to think what games we would have had to get there, but we both had 7-5. As
I assume A&M may be a loss.
I've had A&M as a loss. I thought that LSU was a possibility as a win. I thought Arkansas.
I had Arkansas as a win, I think.
Yeah, and I mean Memphis. I thought they were going to beat Memphis.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So it didn't really matter how they got there, but they got there.
Yeah.
Well, in a way, they did meet Memphis, I suppose. Just depending on how you want to look at it.
Got off on a technicality.
Who got it worse, Tennessee in the Music City Bowl or Mississippi State playing in Liberty Bowl Stadium against Memphis?
That's interesting because they're both very similar plays in that the referees kind of they're with the opposite direction.
Yeah.
The referee blew the play dead early, and the other. It was the referee not blowing the play dead.
You got to give it to Tennessee, right?
I think so. That was a touchdown.
Whereas, we've brought it up a million times. State was still down when that punt happened. So,
and they still were going to have to defend Memphis on the drive.
You don't know for sure that State would have won, but you took a touchdown off the board from Tennessee.
Did you see what Tom Hart said after that game, by the way? So they reviewed Richard and I talked about this yesterday. They reviewed the play, but it's an unreviewable play.
Right.
But they reviewed it anyway for optics.
Yeah.
So the SEC didn't have to, or whoever the referees were, they didn't have to come out and put out a statement afterwards. We reviewed the play.
Yeah, they told Tom Hart that, and Tom was like, apparently that happens all the time, that they will review non-reviewable plays for optics, just to say that they did it.
It's a billion-dollar industry, and we can't do any better than this Tom and Jerry operation.
I mean, can you believe that? But anyway.
Yes, I can totally believe it.
Yep.
I can totally believe it.
You remove, or excuse me, you don't remove it. You hand ammunition to the people that cry conspiracy. Mm-hmm. Because if you're willing to admit to the broadcasters that you review things just for optics, that you can't change the play, then what else do you do? that you won't be willing to admit. It just gives them ammo. I don't know. I mean, we need a sports Alex Jones. Put the hat on and start spewing stuff out there. But
they're turning the frogs into referees.
Okay, so met expectations. Definitely Will Rogers. I mean, we spent the offseason talking about Will Rogers. Well, is Jack Abraham going to come in and take his job? What about this freshman from Texas that grew up loving Mike Leach, took the reins of the job? I think he progressed incredibly well, and the numbers bear that out. But I still feel like fans are really hard on him. Do you guys feel the same way? Maybe it's just the people I'm talking to. But I see a lot of people so overly, inappropriately negative about Will Rogers in the year he just had.
I don't think there's been a guy that has been immune to that at Mississippi State outside of Dak Prescott. I mean, Tyler Russell got it. Nick Fitzgerald was one of the worst, and he was the most prolific runner probably in SEC history. Will Rogers has done something that's never been done, and for a little while, State fans were fully on board with that. And, I mean, even before the Ole Miss game, you start seeing people saying that Will Rogers deserves to be in the Heisman over Matt Corral and things like that. It's hard to believe those things were being said, and now looking at what's being said here after the season. I mean, it's just I don't know if it's ever going to completely go away for him just because there's this stigma around him that he can't do what a lot of quarterbacks could do in this offense. And I counter that with, what he's limited with physically, he makes up for it with what he does within the offense. How many guys would be able to go out there and throw 9 interceptions or whatever it was and as many passes that he threw? I mean, the way that he managed that offense this year was as good as just about anybody has done with Mike Leach. And I think he had maybe a top 5 season among Leach quarterbacks in passing yards.
Easily. So, I mean, it's really incredible that we're having this conversation, but I don't think it's ever going to go away with Will Rogers. And I asked him about that before the bowl game, his thoughts on this message that's being delivered by media, fans, that he's a system quarterback. And his response to that basically was he's asked to run this offense. He can't really help what offense he's in. He's asked to run the offense and win games, and that's his ultimate goal. And he did a pretty good job of that this year. I think with Leach, at the end of the day, 75% completion rating and 4-to-1 touchdown to interception, he's going to take that over the ability to hit some big passes.
No.
If you're going to be able to move the chains consistently, that's the next step for this offense, though, is just to be just a little bit more consistent, especially in the red zone. That cost them some early season games. It cost them against Memphis. It cost them against LSU. Certainly cost them against Ole Miss as well. But once that consistency comes, and that's going to come with you bringing almost everybody back next year, this offense, I think there's another step for this offense to take. They move forward from year 1 to year 2. I think there's another step to take year 2 to year 3.
And later, as the season went on, too, Liberty Bowl notwithstanding, and we'll get to that after a hard break we're up against, but the explosive passing game, or at least pushing the ball more vertically downfield, started happening later in the season. The average depth per target was something I said every week. I had somebody send me a DM saying that they would give me $5 if I never used that phrase again. But that did increase as the season went on. He was more comfortable throwing into tighter windows, throwing beyond linebackers, underneath safeties, and that did improve as the year went on. Absolutely, it did.
Yeah, it did. And the average depth of target, that's something to look at, of course. But in this offense, as long as you're moving the ball down the field and you're scoring points, what does it really matter? And that's the important thing for Mike Leach and Will Rogers.
No, Mike Leach, when he was at Washington, we used to do a segment on this show called Weekly Mike Leach. Not very creative name. But we would play something from one of his press conferences every week because he was just so himself. And I remember the one clip of him, somebody asked him, just about balance. Have you ever thought about being more balanced? He said, what is balance? Yards.
Yeah.
Does it matter if I ran
yards
for 300 and threw for 300 or threw for 600? What's the difference if that's what happens? So, anyway, we'll get no doubt about that. But back with Robbie Faulk, he's with the Thunder and Lightning podcast, SuperTalk offering he and Brian Haydad every day talking Mississippi State. Wherever you get your podcast, find it there. Also covers the Bulldogs for 24/7 Sports. I want to get to a message we got here in a second, but the Liberty Bowl itself, there was a lot of guys that couldn't play, COVID, transfers, opt-outs, those kind of things. I will put the defensive performance aside because of the missing bodies, but no Cross, no Lashley is what State will be facing in 2022. How concerned do you think fans should be that that is what the offense looked like without those two guys, and what are they doing? Have they added their replacements? Are they looking in the portal, stuff like that?
I think there should be some level of concern just of who's going to take over at those positions. But I didn't even see enough in that ball game to really, pin it on the offensive line in that game. I just thought State didn't execute. I thought Nick Jones did well enough at left tackle to get them through that ball game. He protected pretty well. Dollar Bill, I think, got hurt in that game, and they had to switch some guys around. Cam Jones, I think, played right tackle. They brought in a true freshman at right guard. So that started adding up a little bit, but I think that you should feel okay about the offensive line moving in the next season. You got Percy Lewis, who I think is going to factor into one of the tackle spots. You do need to get a tackle out of the portal, and I think that's going to be big for State the next couple of weeks. They're looking at the guy, I think their top target's the guy from Western Kentucky who could be the guy that answers that. But you have some, you got LaQuinston Sharp coming back, and I think that's huge to have the anchor of your offensive line there. But there's something to be said about the fact that Charles Cross almost always was just a glue guy right there on the left side. I mean, Will Rogers could drop back and know that he's not going to get hardly any pressure from the left side. And you're not going to have somebody like that next year. So, you probably will take a step back in some regard there, but I feel okay about the offensive line for State, especially with the addition of Percy Lewis, and you have some younger guys that I think are going to come along and help you there. And there's some pieces coming back too on the line.
Yeah, that's what college football is. I mean, you lose guys, and occasionally you lose talented guys, and you just sort of have to move on. But are you going to have a top 5, top 10 NFL draft pick at left tackle next year? No. But can you find somebody who's completely serviceable that you don't have to worry about Will Rogers getting blindsided every play? Absolutely you can. Whether that's Percy Lewis or a guy from the portal, we'll see. But I feel like, without looking, Charles Cross is probably the highest-rated offensive lineman Mike Leach has ever coached. I don't think he's had any other first-rounders off the top of my head like that. So I feel pretty confident in this staff's ability to go out and target a guy and find them and develop them and put him out there to protect Will Rogers.
What's the latest there? Have you looked at any mocks? Where's he projected to go? We've spent so much time talking about Corral's draft status because of the injury, but what about his?
He's a top 10 guy.
He's top 10.
And after the combine, I only imagine that's going to go up just because he has such a freaky reach. I mean, from a pass blocking perspective, he's going to be probably the best pass blocking tackle coming out. The big question mark is what's he going to do with the run, because he literally has not shown anything in the run game.
He has not put his hand in the ground.
Yeah.
I
guess that could be concerning because he hasn't shown any of that. But from a pass blocking perspective, he's got to be the top pass blocking tackle coming out.
Jay Billis would love him. He's got wingspan.
Yeah,
his reach one finger to the other is going to be easily the best of the combine. He'll test really well. He'll interview really well. So his stock should continue to rise. I mean, right now, if you need an offensive lineman, it's probably either him or Evan Neal from Alabama. Maybe the NC State kid could be right there too. But those three guys are probably all top 10 to 12 picks.
You mean Alabama's got a good offensive tackle? Wow,
imagine that.
What a scene.
They'll have one next year too.
Of course. Here's that message from earlier. He says, "I like Will Rogers." This is from somebody in the 662. "But if opposing teams know we are a mostly passing offense, and additionally your quarterback cannot roll out or extend plays or move the pocket or occasionally run it, then we will always be average at best, not to mention the weak arm." Has Mike Leach, my question to him and to you guys would be, has Mike Leach ever had dual threat quarterbacks in his system?
No.
No. And I've seen that a lot. This offense won't work in the SEC. SEC defenses will shut it down. Like, okay, well, Will Rogers did not have a good game against Texas Tech, but he was pretty stinking good against Texas A&M, which had a really good defense. He was really good against Auburn, who had a pretty darn good defense. There were a few games that, the offense was limited a little bit, but they were able to also move the ball and score points against good defenses that were running that zone base, that were running the rush 3. So I don't prescribe to that. I don't think that you have to have a dual threat guy, a guy that's going to run the football, a guy that's going to escape the pocket or anything like that. Having said that, he can get out there and run. I mean, there's some opportunities that he probably should duck his head down, take off for green grass, because there's a lot of it. So, maybe Mike Leach tells him, if you have a lane and everybody's covered, just take off. Don't stand back there and hold the ball. Don't slide. Just go and run.
Yeah, I think, and I've said this on the podcast, and I said it last week on the show while you were out, Michael, but the Liberty Bowl was just a bad game. It was one bad game, and it was a really bad one. But let's not forget that, a season ago, Matt Corral had games where he threw 6 interceptions and 5 interceptions in one game. Sometimes you just have a bad game. And that shouldn't be, you got to write everything off and start from scratch. Mike Leach has never had a quarterback that was a dual threat guy. Never has. Always had guys, if you look at his system through the years, they always finish the season with something like 50 carries for negative 70 yards because they're getting sacked a lot. It's just never been that way. So, last year there was this offense can't work at all. Well, now that the offense worked, it can't work to its full potential without a dual threat. Just give it one more year. This guy's only a sophomore. He's only made really a season and a half worth of starts. Next season, with another year under his belt, I feel like this offense will take another step forward.
Well, you're telling me that young quarterbacks with limited experience are not finished products. Is that what you're saying?
Revolutionary.
Yeah, remember when Matt Corral was the second-team quarterback for Ole Miss?
Yeah.
And the person that made that decision is now the head coach at Jacksonville State.
See how it all works out in the end.
I mean, you can make bad decisions and still be successful, I suppose. I'm putting you on the spot here, Robbie. You got time to hang around for one more?
Yeah.
When you're
Are
on
you
the
saying
spot,
you want me for?
Yeah.
You want me for 3 segments?
Yeah.
Here?
Well, especially because of what happened last night. I want to talk about your Steelers and Ben Roethlisberger and their draft.
I might shed a few tears.
But somebody also, can you sing? I don't know this about you. Somebody asked you to sing a Black Crowes song, if you got that in you.
Or a Pat Green song.
Or a Pat Green, same guy, right?
I can sing, but everybody can sing. It's
Robert
whether or
Jackson
not I can
sing well.
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
He and I do a mean 2-part harmony on some. What were we singing in Omaha? Was it some Steely Dan?
Nice.
I think it might have been.
Yeah.
How many beers were
Brian
consumed
and I
before that?
Few.
Brian and I will jam out inside the press box at Duty Noble Field.
Absolutely.
Got to get that on video sometime. So there was an announcement today, a portal edition, and this is the time of year when this happens. You've got players all over hitting the portal. I think Ross Dellinger reported today there's over 3,000 names. Isn't that what he reported today? That there are 3,000 names currently in the transfer portal?
Some crazy number like that, yeah.
One of them is now Aaron Odom from Mississippi State. Guys, what kind of a loss is this for the Bulldogs? I know he registered some stats, which is why I bring it up. There have been some state players, there have been some Ole Miss players that we haven't even brought up because most fans would be like, who? But in this case, 3 sacks, almost 20 tackles on the season. What kind of a loss is this?
With the addition of Jordan Davis next year, adding him back in the mix, and you still have Randy Charlton, more than likely defensive end, it does hurt you, I guess, from a depth perspective, but I think he was going to be battling for probably third-team reps. I think DeMonte Russell's gotten back in there at defensive end and is kind of probably taking some of those reps away. Moving into next year, Jack Harris probably is going to get a lot too. So, it's going to be a 6th year, and I think he just decided he wants to go somewhere where he can compete for a starting spot. A Jackson kid, I would not be surprised if he ends up at Jackson State. He's got some connections there, I think, but I did not foresee him getting a ton of snaps next year in his 6th season.
It's kind of funny. You were talking about this on the message board. His recruitment was one where he was committed to State, then he decommitted and committed to Louisville, and there was a complete freak out by Mississippi State fans. This was at the Mullen was still there for his recruitment, and people were just losing it that Aaron Odom might go to Louisville, and here we are, a few years later, he never really did anything for Mississippi State. You just never know with these kids.
No. Your friend Andy Staples says all the time, 17-year-old kids are bad investments.
Yeah.
They're bad investments. Yeah. The ROI is not good. That's why you sign 25 a year and you only have 85 on scholarship.
That's why you're going to see things like Dr. Pepper get out of the NIL business, and you're going to see things like Texas Longhorn Fan LLC get into the NIL business.
If you could name Mississippi State's NIL fund, what would you name it?
Cowbell Cares.
Cowbell Cares. Get like a little hospital cross on there too, just to make it.
Exactly. Like Bully looking in on a little kid. But in reality, all we're doing is funneling money to four-star prospects.
Yeah, but at least it's not illegal in sending people to prison. Hello, Baton Rouge. But
exactly.
Okay, so one constant for Mississippi State over the last 2 years has been Zach Arnett. He doesn't get any attention because of who the head coach is there. Spent some time getting interviewed or pursued anyway last offseason, stayed at Mississippi State. Year 2 of Arnett's defense. What'd you guys think?
Last year they were really handicapped. You look at the guys that were missing last year, either injured, opt out, or had left from the previous season. I mean, he had, I think, in the bowl game and late in the year, I think he had 3 or 4 walk-ons on that defense. So I think what he did was a miracle last year for that defense to be able to get people off the field and limit teams. I mean, I look at that, the Ole Miss game, they really kind of buckled down the second half of that game. I thought they did a great job against Georgia last year, holding them to like 8 yards rushing or whatever it was. And they gave up some big plays, and that's going to come with Zach Arnett's defense. He's going to give up some big plays. He did that this year. I thought they were better this year, but they still were not great. But in the bowl game, to be able to do what they did in that game to get Texas Tech off the field consistently in the first half, they did their job. So from a guy that like Zach Arnett that can just scheme things up the way that he does, I think that's really impressive about him. I'm a little surprised. I guess the bloom is off the rose a little bit with him this year because he was such a hot commodity in the offseason. I'm a little surprised we haven't seen his name come up a little more. But, as of right now, it kind of looks like he's going to be here for a third year.
I think some of that is due to Mississippi State. They paid him well. He's well compensated. And there's something to be said for, Arnett has probably told a lot of coaches in interviews, I'm left alone at Mississippi State. Nobody interferes with me. I call the defense. It's 100% mine. Mike Leach isn't sitting in on my meetings. He's not coming over to me on the sideline and saying this, that, or the other. He stays out of my way. If you can't offer me that freedom, I'm not interested. I think Zach Arnett's next move is a head coach at a group of 5 or something like that. I don't know that he'll take another coordinator job unless somebody like a true blue blood were to offer him. I thought USC was an interesting landing spot for him because he was a West Coast guy, but obviously they didn't seem to have any interest in him. But that's the Zach Arnett career path to me.
I think he really likes it here too. Yeah. I mean, you got a lot of talent to pull from in this particular area. I mean, Mississippi State has traditionally, the state of Mississippi especially, has traditionally produced some really good defensive players, and they've been more prominent on the defensive side of the ball than they have the offensive side. So he's going to get really good talent here. And I think he just generally likes this place. I mean, it kind of fits him.
He did straight up say no to LSU.
Yeah.
I mean, that is something that definitely did happen last season. So that leads you to believe that what you guys are saying is true. I mean, some guys like doing what they're doing and where they are, and the autonomy thing is fascinating. I mean, you've seen what I feel like is the opposite dynamic in Oxford. Jeff Levy did not have autonomy of the offense in Oxford, not even anywhere close. But not the case with Arnett in Starkville, and so there you go. But turning the page now to basketball. So I know Haydad already poked fun at himself for being a little bit down on the basketball team. They get that big win against Arkansas to start SEC play. The Missouri game, hopefully, for State gets canceled altogether, but not getting played this week. Now they've got a big one in Oxford on Saturday, 10-3, so non-conference is basically over for Mississippi State. What would you think, or what do you think about this team and where they sit as conference play really gets ramped up?
trajectory is kind of what I expected whenever we found out that Tolu Smith was going to be hurt and out for most of the non-conference portion of the schedule. Same thing for Rocket Watts. I just think that this team needed to keep its head above water, do what it needed to do just to not tank in that first half of the schedule, so where you're just trying to make up ground in conference play. And for the most part, I thought they did. They were able to kind of stay above water. They didn't get any marquee wins, but they didn't have any bad losses either. So I thought it was good for State to kind of maintain things where they were. And I thought against Arkansas, you saw what this team could be. Very deep, very talented. There's still some things that frustrate you from an offensive standpoint, I think. Defensively, even sometimes defending the three-pointer is an issue for them. But for the most part, you see a really talented and deep team that has all the potential to get to an NCAA tournament. Now it's all about doing it. I mean, this is year 7 for Ben Howland. He has one NCAA tournament. People are tired of that. People are happy that they're not where they were when Rick Ray was here, where they're winning 13, 14 games a year. But winning 20 games doesn't matter like it used to in the early 2000s. Getting to the NCAA tournament is all that matters for Mississippi State now, and that's where they got to be this year. Ben Howland's got to get them there, and they have plenty of opportunities in conference play to do it.
Everything with Howland right now is around that 2019-2020 season that got canceled due to COVID. That team underachieved. They should have been in the NCAA tournament easily. They had 2 guys that got drafted in the second round of the NBA draft. Tyson Carter, Nick Weatherspoon, those guys were good enough role players, good enough players. You had enough depth. That team should have been easily in the tournament, and they weren't. Even though they were a top 4 team in the SEC, they probably were going to have to win at least one game in the SEC tournament to square away a tournament bid. That team underachieved. If that team had been what it was supposed to be, nobody is chirping about Ben Howland today. Everybody looks at last year and goes, well, you lost Perry and you lost Woodard and you lost those guys. It's going to be a tough rebuild. But because he underachieved, sort of the same way, even though Moorhead's not here, we talk about Leach. State missing that up year in the cycle in 18 when they should have probably won 10 or 11 games in football. It affects years going forward, and it affects your perception. If State had just been, a few games better 2019, 2020, and had been easily in the NCAA tournament, nobody's talking about Ben Howland's job status today. But because it looked like he was going to miss the tournament, it's a debate. And I think he knows it, too. I think he knows I need to be in the tournament this year or there could be a change.
We'll see what happens in Oxford on Saturday for sure. We